Hello, welcome to the second part of our lecture on Loshon Hara, gossip of the evil tongue, and its incredible power, destructive power. I'm going to touch on a few amazing ideas now. So last time we spoke about two levels. The basic level of slandering someone is physically you can damage them, just by rationally, you speak about someone in a negative way, you cause people to hate them, or and then they might damage them, or you could get people to be scared of them and they might defend themselves unnecessarily. You can cause hatred between people or get people to destroy people's reputation. That does direct physical damage. But we said that the Loshon Hara actually damages the person who speaks the Loshon Hara and the one who listens to it as well, not just the one who gets spoken about. And we explained that we can only really understand truly if we go to the second level of depth of Loshon Hara, which is the spiritual aspect of it. The spiritual aspect we explained is that we can only get judged on our sins if there is an aspect of justice involved. We spoke a lot about this on the Yom Kippur and the 10 days of repentance lecture I gave earlier today. Right? The idea of justice, measure for measure. So the way that God sets up the heavenly tribunal, right, is by making it dependent on us. So if we do something, then measure for measure, we get that thing done to ourselves. So the only way we can get accused of any of our sins and therefore get punished, God forbid, for them, is only if we do accusing on someone else down here, in the physical, which is Loshon Hara. Once we accuse someone, that gives the power to the Satan, the accuser, the Satan. It's an angel, we explained last time, which has the job of tempting and prosecuting and carrying out the punishment for people's sins. But he can only do the accusing part only if we've actually accused someone else. So a person could have many, many sins, but he doesn't get prosecuted harshly for any of them if he never speaks Loshon Hara. And the only way he be cleansed from his sins is by God doing it in a more merciful way. We spoke a lot about that today, about what happens on Yom Kippur, about this aspect of God which can override justice. Amazing, very, very deep ideas. And that's why Loshon Hara is such a destructive sin in its consequences. Maybe not in the intrinsic sin itself, right? Because if it's all to do with damaging someone, so surely damaging someone physically, killing someone, you can't get worse than killing someone. You damage someone's reputation, but they're still alive at least. So we said that no, because Loshon Hara's damage comes from the fact that a person announces his sins to the heavenly courts and to the Satan, which in turn reveals all of his sins, and he gets punished for all of his sins. Again, that's why it affects even the person who speaks the Loshon Hara, the one who listens to the Loshon Hara. Because the person who listens to the Loshon Hara, that measure for measure aspect which correlates with that will be the heavenly court listening to the Satan, right? To listening to the accuser. And if you believe the Loshon Hara, then they'll believe it. Okay, that's what we explained last time. Now we're going to a third aspect of Loshon Hara, which is much, much deeper and explains much better the absolute devastating destruction which has befallen the Jewish people, a very long exile, destruction of 2 temples, a lot of suffering, and on top of everything, a lack of knowledge of God in the world, which is meant to come with the coming of the Messiah, of the Mashiach. but he hasn't come. Why is that? And we're going to see that is because of Loshon Hara. But it goes to understand that much better. We have to go much deeper. So the way that we exist originally, the way we mentioned this in the earlier lecture today. How do we exist? We exist because there's a divine flow, divine energy of God's existence, and He lets us partake of that existence attribute which He has, which lets us exist as well. So our existence is contingent on proximity, conceptually, spiritually, however you want to put it, with God's existence. God is the definition. He defines what existence is. Right? We happen to exist in as much as we're connected with God. So if you imagine there's a divine flow of energy, of existence, of creative force coming down to keep us, to sustain our existence, and in fact the whole world by extension. So we need that. Now, originally, the way God set up the world was, we spoke about this, I touched upon it anyway, on the Sin of Adam lectures. God gave Adam the divine flow he needed to exist, and he gave a temptation from the outside. That was the Satan, that was the snake. The snake is the physical manifestation of the Satan, that, right? Tempting Adam and Eve to eat from the tree, the forbidden tree. And the job of Adam was simply ignore evil. Don't recognize evil as a reality. And we spoke about that at length in those lectures there. The fact that Adam warned Eve not to touch the tree just in case she might eat. That was the Maharal's explanation of what the root of the sin was. Yeah, he recognized there's a potential of evil. You failed the test straight away. You recognize evil is a real thing, right? Anyway, but once he actually ate from the tree, then evil came into him. We spoke about this on the lecture about the power of eating, the holiness of eating, yeah, as well as that lecture there. That when we eat something, it becomes part of us. So the idea of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, knowledge meaning connection, right? You know something, your mind is connected with it. So the knowledge of good and evil means the connection of good and evil. That's when evil and good get mixed up. The idea of evil, good and evil, not being easily discernible anymore, and they became part of the physical and spiritual makeup of man. And that caused Adam to not be able to tell the difference between good and evil so easily anymore. Right? So in a way, evil was mixed up with man. And we're going to see that actually goes much deeper. So what happened is that God originally was giving that divine energy to man, to Adam directly, and he was just meant to ignore evil. Once he acknowledged evil and actually made it part of himself, God changed the structure of the divine flow. What he did is he said, now that you've given recognition to the Satan, another power, so therefore, measure for measure, he gets your energy now, right? But not completely, right? It's still dependent on us. So what happens if you imagine that a divine pipe of energy or a cable comes down from God, instead of plugging into Adam, it now splits. So it splits into two directions. One direction goes to man, one goes to the Satan, the forces of evil. So now we have an existential battle between man and evil. If man loses the fight now, he literally ceases to exist. His divine energy gets siphoned off by the Satan, And eventually, if it becomes complete, Adam just dies. Man dies. He ceases to exist. There's only enough energy for one of them. So therefore, no one's going to be completely dominant, right? Unless man completely succeeds in vanquishing evil, then evil will just disappear and it would have done its job of the temptation, and the rectification needed to defeat evil will have been completed, which is what's going to happen when the Messiah comes, right? So now there's a fight between man and Satan. The question is how is it determined who gets the flow? It's down completely to man. Man's the one with the free will. He can say, God, I'm going to listen to you, right? I'm going to ignore evil now. So God says, fine, okay, I'll also ignore evil. I'll give you the divine energy. However, whenever we sin, we recognize, God, I don't need your energy that much because I recognize another source of reality. So God says, okay, in as much as you recognize the other source, that will get the divine energy, yeah, and then you'll see whether it gives it to you if you recognize it as a force of a real reality and life force and existence. So the Satan now has the power to leech our energy. And this creates a sort of a seesaw effect. This is called Zenofel. When this one goes up, this one goes down. And we see this relationship between two aspects of mankind, which are represented by Jacob and Esau. Yaakov and Esau, the two twins, the children of Isaac. Obviously, Jacob is the ancestor of the Jewish people. We can see who Esau is later. And the prophecy, Rebecca, the mother of the twins, was having a very confusing pregnancy. She detected there was she assumed that it was one child, and she thought, well, when I go past the house of idolatry, it seems to be getting excited, but when I pass the house of studying, it's also excited. What's going on? Is it schizophrenic? And the prophet told her, no, there's actually two children. You've got twins. One of them is good. He's attracted to spirituality. The other one's attracted to idolatry and evil. And these were the two sons, right? Each one of them was a different aspect of Adam after the sin. What happened when Adam sinned? Basically, I'm not going to go into this now, but there was a fracture in Adam himself. And that's split into two parts. So you have two aspects of mankind now. And that only became apparent much later with Abraham, right? Where Abraham was basically he revealed the good aspect of mankind, which was the part of Adam which didn't fall so far after the sin, and and you have the other 70 nations, which were the ones which are much deeper into the evil, right? We're going to explain that it doesn't mean that 70 nations are intrinsically evil, as the concept of good and evil is much more nuanced in Jewish thought, right? We're going to see. So the idea of the Satan leeching some of our energy, or we taking the energy, that actually manifests itself with the battle between Jacob and Esau, which we're going to speak about a lot today. So now we see that there's, because of this existential battle, the Satan actually has what do you call it? A bias, an ulterior motive. That's it. Yeah, he has an ulterior motive to get man to sin. He's not just doing his job now. God says, "Go and tempt man to sin." The Satan actually wants to do it badly now because he knows his whole survival. He's going to die if he doesn't get man to sin. But remember, it's not just getting man to sin. It's getting man to sin and speak Loshon Hara. If we don't speak Loshon Hara, we could do all the sins. Well, we shouldn't, right? Man can sin, but but there's no judgment. If there's no judgment, there can't be a punishment of taking away that divine energy. So therefore, the survival and success of the Jewish people depends completely, almost completely, on whether we speak Loshon Hara. Incredible. And the Satan's doing everything he can to get us to speak Loshon Hara. That's why it seems to be such a strange sin. It should be very easy not to speak Loshon Hara. Why? You don't get any physical benefit from it. But yet there's something about speaking about other people which is just so, it's such a powerful urge. And that's because the Satan's focusing on what he needs us to do in order for him to survive. Okay, so let's understand this idea of evil before we carry on. So many people misunderstand this idea about the relationship between Jews and non-Jews, right? If you look at how things seem to be arranged, it seems that the Jews are the ones who've got God's message in the world, and then you've got the opposition, which is the non-Jewish nations. To the extent that's true, because they rejected the Torah, right? They didn't want to accept upon themselves the burden of subjugating themselves purely only to God's will. They wanted to have their own life as well, where they can do certain sins. We spoke about this in another lecture, the anti-Semitism lecture. I think we touched on it. However, the Leshem speaks about that there's an issue. It can't be that straightforward. We know there are many, many very good, righteous non-Jews, right? And we spoke about Gerim, about converts recently, and we said really they're essentially Jewish souls in non-Jewish bodies. There's different opinions we explained there. However, there are some non-Jews who are just very good people. They're very righteous, very moral, very, very ethical people. So how can you say they come from the side of evil, the side of the Satan? And we know, unfortunately, that some Jews, right, who are extremely evil. Like some of the most evil people in history have been Jews. If you look at in the Bible, you look at the Old Testament, you look at people like Yerovam ben Nevat, the first king of the northern kingdoms. He got the whole Jewish people, the 10 out of the 12 tribes, to serve idolatry. Only the reason was because he wanted to maintain his kingdom, which was against the southern kingdom of the Davidic dynasty. And because of that, well, we've got to stop them going to the temple, because once they go to the temple, which is in Jerusalem, in the southern kingdom, they're going to repent and they're going to reject me. So I've got to stop people going there, but I've got to give them something else in the meantime. Give them a couple of golden calves. The Jews, the story of the golden calf in Exodus chapter 32, that was one calf. Jeroboam made two calves. So you take whichever one's closest to you, right? So very evil Jews. How does it work? So it explains like this. Once Adam ate from the tree, good and evil got mixed together. Now, even evil has a good element to it, and good can have evil mixed in with it. So nothing's completely good, completely evil. So the idea is that at the root, the Jewish people are good, right? They're the ones who are attached to God, but because of the confusion of the eating of the tree, a lot of evil got mixed up with that, right? And so much so that it can have totally evil Jews. We refer to them as the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav is mixed multitudes. These are Jews who are really actually anti-Jewish, right? Or self-hating Jews. Evil, on the other hand, had a lot of good mixed with it. So that's why you can have lots of righteous people of the nations. But at the root, it's coming from a negative place. However, the Leshem says a beautiful idea, so this is going to get me out of trouble now, right? For making it sound like we look down on the non-Jews, that are evil at the core. There's something much deeper. We've spoken about the main theme of this whole channel, the idea of Gilui Yichud, about the idea of revealing God through the darkness. Adam planned for some of his descendants, in fact most of his descendants, to be on the side of darkness and evil, and for them to reveal God in their special way, right? Either that's by the righteous of the nations, or even by the evil ones of the nations. You're going to see today an amazing idea that even the ones who intend to rebel against God, they end up revealing God in the end, right? So you can't, so basically don't say, you shouldn't think that just because someone's Jewish or non-Jewish, they're automatically good or bad. That's just not true. Everyone's got free will at the end of the day. The question is, what's your starting point? Do you have a battle spiritually, or is the battle going to be more on a physical level where a person's already influenced heavily by evil and his choice is to break out of that? Or the job of the Jew's job is much more dangerous, because if you fail, then that means going from here into a negative direction, where the non-Jew has basically got more room to move up than he does to move down, because the natural state of the non-Jew will be to go after the physical attractions and things like that, right? People might not feel this reality. That's how that's what the Torah says. So I'm just reporting. Don't blame the messenger, however uncomfortable it might feel, right? But of course, remember, the idea of the Jew and the non-Jew is precisely set up in a way to reveal God's presence in the world in the best way possible, right? The idea of the light, the soul, and the body, and they need to work together. Each one needs the other one. So just as the non-Jews need the Jews to bring down the spirituality, the Jews need the non-Jews in order to have someone to give the spirituality and God's light to be light to the nations, right? And the good non-Jews and the good Jews go together to the world to come, whereas the evil Jews and the evil non-Jews will have to go the long route, the one where they have to do the suffering first. Okay. So that's our way of looking at evil and the Satan, right? As we said before, that God saw everything He made, Tov Ma'od, and the Midrash says Tov good means the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination. Tov Ma'od means the evil inclination. So you see that the way that the Torah looks at evil is it's an extreme form of good. It gives the possibility of free will, right? Obviously, we don't go and do evil because it's good, right? Because it's very good. But that's how God sets up the structure, so to reveal God's omnipotence in the end, right? And that gives the merit for both the Jew and the non-Jew to get to the world to come. Okay. So, okay. Now let's have a look. So, bearing all that in mind, hopefully you'll understand what I'm going to say following up now in the right context, and you'll be able to, each person, whether Jew or non-Jew, will be able to appreciate what their role is in each of these different ideas which we're going to speak about now. Okay. So we've got this sort of seesaw relationship between man and the Satan, and that manifests itself later as the Jews and the non-Jews, but specifically the non-Jews who are trying to corrupt the Jews or persecute the Jews. Of course, as we said, the good non-Jews are actually those ones which actually take the sparks in the darkness and elevate them. So they're actually doing a much more impressive job. Just to illustrate this, we speak about the two sets of people in the Kabbalistic thought. The two twins, Jacob and Esau. Esau was meant to be the fourth of the four patriarchs. You have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Esau. And it actually says that Esau was spiritually higher than Jacob, right? You can understand this in how we've explained the idea of how evil works. Yeah, he had the ability to destroy evil from within, whereas Jacob had Adam's original job, just be spiritual, stay away from evil, right? Whereas Esau was the primary descendant of Adam, who was meant to actually actively destroy evil, right? So you've got Adam before the sin is represented to an extent by the Jewish people, and the ones who have the new job, which was the intention of Adam, bring more evil into the world and then destroy the evil to sanctify God's name on a much deeper, more profound, meaningful level. That was meant to be the job of Esau, and that's a much harder job. That's why his soul was much higher. He was not successful. He came back later on. He was reincarnated in King David. And King David, he's the fourth of the four patriarchs. We've got three and then an extra one. Okay, we're not getting into that idea now. They can have a chair which can rest on three legs. But the fourth leg is unnecessary, but it makes it much more stable. It finishes it. Okay. So we understand this relationship between man and the Satan, or the Jew and the non-Jew, Jacob and Esau, Yaakov and Esau. So let's have a look at Jewish history now, look at world history, and we'll see this idea of the Satan leeching from our divine energy and passing it on to the enemies of the Jews, right? Which are generally the non-Jews who persecute us or tempt us to abandon our religion, and it can also be to self-hating Jews, the Jews which try also corrupting the Jewish people. Whoever it is, whoever the Satan's minions are to do his job, they're the ones who are going to be getting this energy, and we're going to see the energy is going to be removed from the God-fearing Jews and given over to people who essentially against God. So let's start with the first temple period. We can actually start with Egypt. The exile in Egypt is meant to be the archetype of all exiles, right? The Arizal, the great Kabbalist Rav Yitzchak Luria, the father of modern Kabbalah, modern Jewish mysticism, he explains that after Adam sinned, he separated from his wife 130 years, and he produced lots of evil spirits, right? Children which were with not his wife. Won't go into exactly what happened there. But anyway, he produced these negative spirits. These were the souls of the Jewish people in the Egyptian exile, as far as I remember correctly. And these souls, because of all the evil which had been given over to the dark side, so to speak, by Adam to produce them, right? So the Jewish souls were bereft of any spiritual, they were almost walking zombies, almost, in Egypt. Spiritually, they were completely under the dominion of the Egyptians, spiritually, and that manifests physically as well. And we know, we mentioned last time, that Moshe said, I see when the person was trying to slander Moshe, said, now I understand why the Jewish people are on such a harsh exile in Egypt. It's because of Loshon Hara. Why? Why Loshon Hara? We've got much deeper understanding now. It's because of the Loshon Hara that was in the Jewish people at that time. That gave power for the Satan to leech an immense amount of energy and give it over to the Egyptians. So the Egyptians were totally dominant, Physically, they dominated the Jews. They enslaved them, and the Jewish people were stuck. They were literally stuck, spiritually and physically. Right? And when God was going to take the Jewish people out, he had a whole discussion with Moses, trying to convince Moses to be the Messiah of that generation, to get the Jewish people out, take the Jewish people out of the Egyptian exile. Yeah, Moshe actually said something negative about the Jewish people. Yeah, he said they won't believe me when I come. I think maybe Moshe didn't mean it in a negative way, but I thought he was trying to be humble, right? He was humble. He said, why should they believe me, right? I said, no, that's Loshon Hara about the Jewish people. They've got faith, right? They know they've been promised they're going to be taken out. They're just waiting for the sign. If you give them the sign, they'll believe you, right? And they'll, right? So what did God say? He said, take your stick. What? This is all in Exodus chapter 1, 2, 3, I think chapter 4, right? It's the one where God speaks, either 3 or 4, where God speaks to Moses at length, trying to convince him to be the leader of the Jewish people. So God says to him, take this stick, throw it on the ground, and turn into a snake, right? Right? And then Moshe ran away, right? And they go grab the snake, and then Moshe grabbed the snake, and it turned back into a stick, right? This is the sign, right? This is the sign, one of the signs you've got to show the Jewish people. Another one, right? Put your hand in your shirt, whatever, and take it out, and it turns into leprosy, which is the punishment of someone who speaks Loshon Hara, someone who speaks slander. And they said, put your hand back in, take it out, and then the leprosy went away. Right? So you show them these two signs. Why these two signs? Because God's telling them, you know why you're in exile? It's because of Loshon Hara. What's Loshon Hara? It's the sin of the snake. The snake is the one who gets us to speak Loshon Hara. When we speak Loshon Hara, we give power to the snake, to the Satan. Right? So God's saying, however you want to interpret it, I'm not sure exactly how you interpret it, but he's showing you the idea of the snake there, yeah? You grab the snake by its tail and turn back into a stick. You can fix the exile by taking that snake and making it straight. Have a straight connection with God as opposed to the snake, which is kind of slippery and, curvy. And it's not a direct head to tail. It's not a head to tail like that. It's like that. Yeah. The idea of the leprosy again. He's telling them, I spoke Loshon Hara about you, and this is the sign God told me to show you. Show that God says, look, Loshon Hara is the one thing which is causing this exile, right? And I see now that Loshon Hara stopped, so it's time for you to go out. That's one of the 4 merits, I think, that the Jewish people were taken out of Egypt. They didn't change their language. They didn't intermarry with the Egyptians. They didn't change their clothes, and they didn't speak Loshon Hara. Right? The Medrash says it's one of the 4 merits. So we see Loshon Hara directly referred to in the Egyptian exile and the Egyptian redemption. Secondly, let's have a look at the first exile. When we refer to the 4 exiles, we're referring to the Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman exile. The first one was the destruction of the first temple. Remember, we spoke in the lecture about Tisha B'Av, the 5 tragedies of the 3 weeks, and Tisha B'Av lecture. We explained that something unique about the first temple, which we didn't have in the second temple, was the idea of the Shekhinah. Right? And we said that we lost this because of Loshon Hara. Okay. The question is, where does the Shekhinah go now? We lost the divine presence. Where did it go? Furthermore, we said that when we lose the divine flow, we lose a certain spiritual influx from God, it gets given to the Sotan. So what's the Sotan going to do with the Shekhinah, right? He's going to go to shul and daven, well, he's going to do prayers. What's he going to do with it? So to understand what the Shekhinah does, right? It's a massive subject in itself. We spoke about it many times. We'll speak about it later on the fourth level of Loshon Hara, hopefully, if I remember. So at the time of the first temple, we had prophecy. People were able to reach a very high, profound level of knowledge of God through prophecy. So what's the Satan going to do with that? He's going to set up an opposing negative form of prophecy. What is prophecy? Prophecy is we get to know the inner workings of reality, to know what knowledge, deep knowledge of reality. So that can be in terms of Kabbalistic knowledge, the knowledge of how the worlds work, how God creates the worlds, how the divine flow comes down, right? And that's what the prophets experienced. Look at the book of the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, chapter 6 in the book of Isaiah. It shows what the prophets actually experienced. They were able to experience all different spiritual worlds, angels, how God transmits his energy through the angels, through the different worlds, spiritual dimensions. So the Satan's going to have to try taking this and give it to the non-Jews who persecute the Jews or seduce the Jews to abandon our connection with God. And they're able to do that much better since they've got an element of truth now. Now, this is key. This is what we were saying before. The idea of the evil itself being a revelation of God eventually, but on a much more circuitous route. But in the meantime, the bad non-Jews, the ones who persecute the Jews, and the enemies of God ultimately, are now closer to the truth. They got more power now. The divine energy is being diverted to the Satan. He's giving it to the forces which are against God in the world. Right? We know each nation of the 70 nations has their own divine energy source, and it comes through their guardian angel. The Satan has his nation as well. Who's the nation of Satan? As we said before, it's Esau or Edom, or we know them today as Rome, the ancient Roman Empire, right? So when we lose something, the primary beneficiaries of this will always be Rome. Okay, bear that in mind. So we know that Rome is Western civilizations based on Rome, and Rome got its ideologies and ideas and its sophistication from the Greeks. The Greeks were the first nation to have this type of way of looking at the world, a very physical, sort of down-to-earth intelligence, philosophy, famous Greek philosophers, right? And the Greek Empire. So when the first temple got destroyed, what's really going on is we're losing the Shekhinah. We're losing the ability to have a very deep, fundamental knowledge of the world. That gets given to, not completely, but to a great extent, that gets given to the Greeks, right? Who end up eventually passing that on to the Romans. So the famous Greek philosophers and scientists, or whatever you want to call them, Parmenides, Pythagoras, you've got the famous philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, right? And then shortly afterwards, the actual physical dominance, Alexander the Great conquering most of the known world just within a few years, incredible suddenly burst of a nation from nothing into massive expansion, spiritually, philosophically, intellectually, right? That all happened within the 100-year period, approximately, after the destruction of the first temple. Amazing. The Jewish people lose their key to unlocking the wisdom of the higher worlds and deep ideas about reality, which they got through prophecy. You have the corresponding knowledge being given to the non-Jews in the form of the Greeks, and of course the Greeks were the third of the four exiles, and eventually to the Romans, which was the fourth exile of the Jews. Okay, and in fact, it's not limited to the Greeks. At the same time as the destruction of the first temple, you had a sudden explosion of knowledge and wisdom and philosophy in the East, with Confucius, right? The Chinese, we have 500 million Confucianists today, right? Right? He was a great philosopher, right? We also had prophecy. What is prophecy? Okay, we spoke about what type of knowledge prophecy gives you. It's a deep knowledge about the reality of the world, about the ideas which lie behind the physical world. But what was the experience of prophecy itself? It was the idea of meditation. The idea the prophet would sit there, he'd meditate, his soul would be elevated into the spiritual dimension, and he would get spiritual experiences. That's meditation. What happened at that time? Amazing. At the same time period. We're talking about, those who want to look it up, first, the second temple was from the year 350. So it's about the year 420, I think, was the destruction of the first temple. So you have the Greek Empire started around then, within 100 years afterwards, 150 years after that. Then you have the Confucius in the East as well. Then you have Buddhism as well, the massive religion based on meditation. Meditation got taken away from the Jews. The Sultan takes it, gives it to the non-Jews, but it's an impure form of meditation. And meditation without a connection with God is just meditation to the higher plane. But what about God? You're meant to be connected with God through meditation. Okay, you've got Jewish meditation, and then you've got sort of empty meditation. I had a friend who was he used to be non-religious. He was actually into a lot of meditation, and he went to the Far East and everything. And he said it's sublime experience, meditation. Your mind's so clear, and it's just so open. You just feel an expanse in your mind. But he felt that there's something missing. Okay, so what do I do with it now? Okay, it's just a nice state of being. But when he became religious and he started doing the Shema, he meditated on the words of the Shema. Hear, O Israel, God is our Hashem is our God. Hashem is one. Right? He used to spend a few minutes just doing that verse, and he used meditation techniques. And then he realized, that's what meditation's for. My mind is so clear. Now I can truly focus on these words and the concepts which lie behind the Shema, right? And he was able to kind of do what the prophets did, maybe on a lower level, right? And that's what Buddhism is essentially, right? So Siddhartha Gautama, can I pronounce that name properly, or Buddha, he's known as. It gets up from the tree and says, yes, I experienced a 7th level or 8th level of transcendence, right? That's the idea of the Sultan taking prophecy and meditation, giving it to the non-Jews in a negative way, right? At the same time, you've also got Lao Tzu, right? Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. right? It's also a Far Eastern religion, the idea of good and evil, right? Yin and yang, right? Also a very spiritual type of religion there, all at the time. So you had an explosion. The whole world was very, very like, just idolatry, just your regular bog standard idols, right? But then suddenly, at the destruction of the first temple, when we lost the Shekinah, we lost that prophecy, all over the world there's an explosion of knowledge, an explosion of spirituality suddenly. And on top of all this, we mentioned Rome. So Rome wasn't dominant yet. We didn't have the Roman Empire. We had the Republic of Rome started around that time, around the time of the destruction of the first temple, around the year 350. I don't know the exact date of that. Okay, amazing. So we see this dynamic. When we lose something, the Sultan takes it and uses it against the Jews, to oppress the Jews and to distract the Jews. The Jews going to the Far East, looking for spirituality, disenfranchised Jews who don't realize the richness of Judaism go to the Far East, meditation, right? Go to Hinduism, Buddhism, right? I heard there was like, I can't remember, there was like some sort of Israeli shops in the Far East somewhere. Why? Because there's so many of the people going to the monasteries that were actually Israelis, the Jewish, so they had some sort of a Jewish sort of organization there. Incredible. Okay. So we see that the Sultan's bringing the very same Shekinah, that divine energy, which makes us aware of knowledge, and he's distracting us, he's diverting it. Oh, look, Jews, don't pay attention to that. Go to this form of meditation. Or, in a more aggressive and antagonistic way, I'm going to give power to the Greeks and the Romans who are going to actually actively oppress the Jews. Then you have the second temple. The second temple was destroyed. We explained that that's to do with the idea of the nation of the Jewish people, right? You have the merit which we had. The second temple was the unity of the Jewish people, and when we lost that, that gets given to the Sultan as well. So we lost the nation, what it means to be Jewish. So now Judaism itself goes to the Sultan. Where do you see this? Of course, we know in the year 70, which was destruction of the second temple, that's when basically the Christianity was starting. Also, it started a bit slightly earlier, right? But it really picked up speed in the late part of the first century, right? It gets stronger and stronger. Eventually, Rome took it as a national religion. And of course, the destruction of the temples through the Romans, right? So what happens? So you have a new religion called Christianity, which is very strange. It's not simply like any other religion. Yeah, it's not like a Buddhism, which they believe in their own meditation, or Hinduism, where they've got the idea of reincarnations, and they've got their own ideas, right? Christianity is the first religion which don't have their own belief system and philosophy. They're literally taking Judaism and reforming Judaism in their own image. It's sort of a twisted, superficial form of Judaism. That's what Christianity is. Right? I'm not trying to attack them or anything. I'm just making observation. That is what it is. It's taking Judaism and claiming, this is Judaism now. Yeah, the Jews, you've been rejected. We're the real Jews now. Okay, where did that come from? It doesn't say that in the Torah, right? That the Jews will be rejected. The Torah is very clear. The Jews will never be rejected, even though they'll be suffering, even though they rebel. Right? Leviticus chapter 26, verse 39 or 44. Right? Can't remember which I get them confused there. Yeah, even though I'm going to send them into exiles, even if they annul my covenant, I will never reject them, right? I'll punish them severely, but eventually I'll bring them back to the land of Israel, which very recently that's happened in terms of the last few thousand years. That only happened about 80 years ago, 1948, with the establishment of the State of Israel. We have en masse Jewish people coming back to Israel finally. Amazing. However, Christians say the Jews are no longer the Jews because of what's happening now. The Satan's taking Judaism itself and making his own religion. I'm making my own Judaism. The Jews are not the Jews anymore. The Torah is no longer the Torah. You've got the New Testament, right? The Torah was just the Old Testament. Now we've got the new one. What about the idea of the Mashiach? About the final God finally revealing Himself in the world, right? And the messenger to deliver that message is the Mashiach. So you know what? Instead, we'll make the Mashiach, we'll make him God himself. Chas v'shalom, right? God forbid to say that, right? They take the idea of the Mashiach and then twist it into idolatry. Even the Pope wears a couple, yarmulke, right? Incredible. It's just it's a mimicry of Judaism. How does that happen? Because the Satan takes Judaism, and he makes an external facade of Judaism. But if you penetrate deep into it, you'll see there's nothing there. It's an empty religion. The only thing which is keeping it standing is its superficial mimicry of Judaism. But we see there's something important in that. In fact, the Rambam says there's a reason why God arranged for Christianity to happen and Islam as well in the East. It's because we want the non-Jews to get used to the idea of a Messiah, the idea of a one God, even though it's twisted, it's not really one because it's a Trinity, and it's not the idea of the Messiah is messed up as well. But the idea of the Jewish people, the idea of God revealing Himself in the world, the idea there's a purpose to the world which no other religion has, right? Only Judaism, as far as I know, until that time, had the idea that time is not just going on endlessly, right? Like the other religions believe. They believe there's a purpose to time, and everything's going to converge to a grand finale where God reveals Himself to the world, and the world to come starts in this world, right? The resurrection of the dead, and this world being transformed into the spiritual world to come. At least Christianity and Islam have those ideas. They're twisted because remember, the Sultans has to make these religions to fight against Judaism, right? To distract Jews who are not knowledgeable, to test the Jews' loyalty and their love for God, their faithfulness to God. Or you're going to be, yeah, okay, I like this religion, it's a bit easier, whatever, right? Or they're threatening to kill us. Oh, I don't want to get killed. All right, well, okay, Muhammad, okay, we'll join your religion then. Yeah, I don't want to be killed. So on one hand, it's a temptation or a threat. On the other hand, it brings something good hidden. There's a seed of goodness within it. That's what Adam had. That's what Adam intended when he ate from the tree. He wanted to bring that evil in, but show God through the evil itself. Look, I'll even give power to the Satan. I'll let him create a fake religion, a fake Judaism. But even within that, eventually, that's going to actually lead for more people to acknowledge God. Eventually, when the true Mashiach comes, then they'll realize, oh, okay, okay, yeah, we almost got it right. Okay, the Jews were right in the end. The Messiah isn't God. He's just someone to represent God in the world and bring God's message. Okay, fine. So they only have to adjust slightly, right? So they're already almost prepared for God's revelation. Whereas if they were totally idolatrous, it would come as a massive shock to the system. They wouldn't be able to handle it. What? Our whole worldview's gone completely upside down, and we don't know how to make sense of anything. So Maimonides says it's some good aspects of Christianity and Islam, even though it's idolatry and false prophets in the case of Islam. But the fact is, they're closer to the truth, and the reason why they're closer to the truth is because the Satan's taken from the divine energy, which is coming down to the Jews, that what it means to be Jewish, and they've given what it means to be Jewish to the non-Jews, which is bad because we've lost something, and there's our oppressors now have got some legs to stand on, right? Interesting. The Zohar actually says that Loshon says that the snake uh, had its legs taken away after it convinced Adam to sin, and slithers on the ground. But whenever we speak Loshon Hara, the big snake, referring to the Satan, actually gains its legs back and it's able to stand and have power. Interesting. So these nations who are doing the bidding of the Satan now have a leg to stand on, so to speak, because there's some element of truth in what they have, but obviously it's mixed very much with evil. But ultimately, it's for good purpose, because everything, even evil, is ultimately an extreme form of good. Yeah, as it reveals God through the dark, because it shows that even the darkness has got a purpose of revealing God ultimately. So it's beautiful how it all comes together in the end. But in the meantime, it's very negative for the Jewish people, and for God's name's getting corrupted and twisted. Right? People think God's a man, which they didn't think beforehand. So it's got very serious downsides, and it's got small silver linings. Okay. Now, let's carry on in history, world history. The Zohar says, "Be'itra Chishena," right? At its time, I will make the redemption come quickly, right? In chapter 60 or 60 in the book of Isaiah. Ani Hashem Be'itra Chishena. I am God, and I will hasten the redemption at its time. I think it's there. And the Zohar says, Be'ito means Be'ez Hey. If you split the word Be'ito, you split it into Be'ez Hey. And the time of Hey, 5. This refers to the end of the year 5000. That the messianic light God will start bringing into the world. Okay? Now, this light is the revelation of the internal structure of reality. Our understanding, we refer to as Kabbalah. Kabbalah is our understanding how the spiritual mechanisms work in the higher worlds, which result in the physical world. So that starts in the year 5000, which is the secular year 1240. So what is the physical corresponding concept to understanding the internal structure of reality? That's science, right? We know that the modern scientific method started to be formed around the year 1240 by a person called Roger Bacon, right? Roger Bacon, Francis Bacon, right? Yeah, I think two people, right? They developed the scientific method, which later on we're going to see got much more sophisticated. But the rejection of the Aristotelian thinking of philosophy, the idea of just using your mind to work out truth, instead of examining what's right in front of you, they used to think that they philosophized that the man has 52 teeth, because that's correct, right? And they had their very genius ways of working that out. But the question is, we'd ask them, why don't you just count them? But Aristotle said, well, it's such a lowly thing. Actually, go and count them. Why you be connected with the physical world like that? It's disgusting. Be part of a world of ideas. But Roger Bacon said, no, if we want to develop, right, let's actually count the teeth. Let's examine the world, open up the body, see how the cadavers, see how, so you've got the heart there, the lungs there. So they tried working out how the physical body worked, right? They investigated through rigorous analysis, right? That comes from the Satan taking from the light of the Mashiach, which comes in the year 5000 or 1240 CE, right? The light of the Mashiach, which is revealing the internal structure of reality on the spiritual level, we have the equivalent on science. As we said, that doesn't mean that science is bad. It means that science reveals God in its own way, but yet it hides God. It has the potential to hide God as well, like all these other examples we've given. Right? They reveal, but they hide. Instead of directly revealing, they reveal through a circuitous route. Right? We can work out the amazing wisdom of God by looking at science. Right? DNA. Right? Right? Looking at the incredible way the cell works. Right? Amazing. Hopefully, I'll do a lecture in the proof series that proving God through the amazing genius of which we see in science. However, science also gives you the opportunity to think, well, do we need God at all? Maybe we can have now rational explanations how the world can have evolved just naturally through random events. We give it enough time, we're going to see that evolution, you need way more time. And that's a massive understatement for any evolution, how they explain it to happen. Right? They think, oh, it's billions of years. Billions of years is nothing compared to, you need about that much time for one species to evolve into another one. And they only have that amount of time, billions. You need much more than billions. You need the numbers are just beyond words, quadrillions, quintillions. Talk about things which the order of magnitude of Google's, and more than that even. Ridiculous numbers, but anyway, well, that's for another time. But science at least gives the possibility of denying God completely, and it's the first time where people actually doubted God's existence itself. That never happened. Even the Greeks, they understood there was a prime force, prime intellect, and everything. But to say that there's no God at all, atheism, completely new idea. And that's only because science made it possible. Science is a good thing because ultimately science is just explaining the wisdom of God in the world. Amazing. But because it's framed in the scientific way, it leaves the door open to have a certain type of heresy, which is atheism. Right? And that happened at the time when we were meant to be getting the Kabbalah, the hidden mysticism, the mystic aspect of reality. And in fact, what happened for the Jews at that time, there was the discovery of the Zohar, the primary Kabbalistic work, which most of Kabbalah is based on, and also the Sefer Bahir, a smaller work, but also a very fundamental work in Kabbalah, all around the time of 1240. Amazing. What's the significance of the year 5000, by the way? We know that Shis Alfen Shnin Havi Alma, B'chad Chorov. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says the world's meant to last for 6,000 years, and then the seventh millennium is the world to come. Essentially, it's more complicated than that, but that's generally how we map out time in terms of this world and the next world. 6,000 years since the creation of Adam. Right? We spoke about Rosh Hashanah when Adam was created. And we are now in the year 5786. So we're getting quite close towards the end. It's almost close to 210 years left before the year 6000, where the world ceases to exist in its physical state completely and completely transforms into a spiritual reality. Anyway, but the year 5000, right? So if you have a look at the way the week is set up, you've got 6 days of the week and you've got Shabbos, the Sabbath, where we have the day of pleasure, where we enjoy ourselves. The 6 days of work. 6 days you shall work and you should toil and do all your work, and the seventh day you must rest, as it says in the Torah many times. The 6,000 years correspond to 6 days of the week. So we've got 6 big days of the week, 6 millennia, right? So at the end of the 5th millennia, you've got Friday, right? The 6th millennium, from the year 5000 to 6000, that is essentially Friday, which is Erev Shabbos. The welcoming of Shabbos, preparing for Shabbos. the Sabbath. So that's why this spiritual light starts to come down now, because we're preparing for the world to come, the 7th millennium. Right, that's just so we can frame these following ideas nicer, right? This is all from Rabbi Kessen again. I have to stress this. And the lecture, hopefully I'll remember to put in the link as well. I've had a lot of stuff of my own in here, but the main part of the lecture is his. Okay, so that's the year 1240. What happens in the year 1740? That's the year 5500. That is halfway through the 24-hour period of Friday. So, of course, Friday in Jewish thought starts at 6 o'clock Thursday evening, right? Because the Jewish day starts at the night. Then you have 12 hours later. That's 500 years in the universe clock. That will be Friday morning as you're waking up. Oh, it's Erev Shabbos. Let's prepare for Shabbos now, right? That's the year 1740. So now the light of the Mashiach comes down much stronger. You're getting much closer to that time where everything is revealed, where God reveals himself totally. That's the year 1740. And what happened in the year 1740? Who wins? Are we still speaking Loshon Hara? Is the Sultan still taking energy? Unfortunately, yes. What do we have? We have, just shortly before that time, we have the Khmelnytsky massacres, right? The 1649, 1648, 1649. He had one of the worst destructions of Jewish life ever, besides the Holocaust. You have a third of European Jewry gets wiped out in just 2 years. Incredible. And that's without the sophistication of the Nazis, which had machinery and transport. Khmelnytsky massacres were absolutely devastating. A third of of European Jewry gone in 2 years. Staggering. Right? And what happened afterwards? They have one of the most destructive false messiahs. Remember, it's the light of the Mashiach coming down. But if we don't merit it, it goes to the Satan. And what does he do? He creates one of the most destructive false messiahs. Someone who is really seen to be a very holy Jew, a big Kabbalist, Shabtai Tzvi, right? The Jewish people, because of all these terrible massacres, they were still, that must be the war of Gog and Magog, right? And especially interesting, Khmelnytsky was in Ukraine, which we've said on our Armageddon lecture was actually Magog. So it seemed to fit in with the prophecies very much. So they were looking, right, Mashiach must be coming now. That was terrible, but let's get... And they have Shabtai Tzvi, a big genius, holy man, seemingly holy man. And he said, yes, let's all go to Israel now. So he made a pilgrimage, and then about half of the Jewish people, I think, or something like that, the remnant was going with him. I can't remember the exact details. And he got to Turkey. They were going to return to Zion, to return to the land of Israel and re-establish the temple, etc. But when he got to Turkey, they didn't let him in. They said, you can't come through, you have to convert to Islam. So people are thinking, right, he's going to show them, he's the Messiah. He's not going to... And then he converts. He converts to Islam. And people are devastated. And they have a massive aversion to Kabbalah afterwards. We see in the time of the Ramchal, who's just about 30, 40 years afterwards, right? Oh, he's one of these Sabbateans, the Shabtai Tzvi Sabbatean, right? That's what his name was. That's what they called him. Yeah, and they burnt a lot of the Ramchal's, Ramosha Chaim books, because he was very young at the time when he wrote the... Oh, he's one of these Kabbalistic, dodgy Kabbalists. So be careful. So we see that the negative aspect of the Mashiach actually destroyed the good aspect which was revealed. We know in that time period of 1740, around then, we had 4 major schools of Kabbalah. The Baal Shem Tov, the head of the Hasidic movement, the Vilna Gaon, who we mentioned many times, of the Ashkenazic European Jewry, Kabbalistic movement, right? The Ramchal, who's the Ramchal? What do we have to say about the Ramchal? One of the most amazing Kabbalists of all time, right? Who almost all our lectures are drawing on his teachings somehow, and most of them are based on his teachings. And you have the Rashash, which is the Sephardic, the Oriental school of Kabbalah, right? So that all happened around from the year, I think one of them was born late 1690s, 1697, I think one of them was born, another one 1703, 1707 was a Ramchal, I think, and the Vilna Gaon was born in 1720. So he's talking about, and this is therefore the main part of their life went through the year 1740. So that was a time of immense revelation of the Kabbalistic knowledge. But yet, on the other hand, there's a massive power given to a false Messiah, right, in the form of Shabtai Tzvi, and mass destruction. When God said, "Okay, I want to bring Mashiach now," and the Jews aren't ready because they're still speaking Loshon Hara, He gives massive power to the Sultan. He uses it as to destroy the Jewish people. Finally, we get to the modern times, the year 1990, which is the year 5750, which is after midday on Friday afternoon. That's when we really get the preparations. We start hurrying. It's almost Shabbos. Come on, let's get on with it. Right? So God makes the world, the light of Mashiach come down much more intensely. We don't merit it because of Loshon Hara, unfortunately. So what happens? You've got a massive explosion of science, right? We didn't speak about the Industrial Revolution as well. The year 6000, Zohar speaks about that year as well. But there's going to be an immense opening of knowledge from above and from below. That science, when it actually started making a difference to the world got transformed in the year 1840, which is the year 600 of the sixth millennium, year 5600, which is 1840. We didn't mention that, but that's the Industrial Revolution. That's how that comes in. The year 1990, we have the massive technological revolution, the idea of the internet, the idea of science goes completely bonkers, right? You had that 90% of all scientists lived, only, from the year 1990, those few years, massive amounts of scientific papers, thousands every day are being produced. That was from the year 1990. Technology is accelerating faster and faster, whereas the state of the Jews, remember, that's a massive amount of siphoning off of the divine energy, giving it to the Satan. So we're left with a very, very small amount of the energy now. So the Jewish people are on the last leg standing. We have the Reform movement that happened in the 1800s, like we said. We get the Industrial Revolution. So on an industrial level, Jewish people are abandoning their faith. The Reform movement, the Conservative movement, Liberal movement, all in the 1800s, right? Bible critics, right? Questioning the authenticity of the Bible itself. Gets worse and worse until you have mass assimilation, right? Of course, you have the Holocaust as well, the First World War, Second World War, absolute destruction in the whole world. Terrible. And then eventually you have the mass assimilation, whereas 90% of Jews not Torah observant. It's got much better recently because the nuns are the Jews tend not to have children. We're having more children. The Orthodox Jews having more children. So it's going back. So that means we stopped. There's a massive chizuk, strengthening of not speaking Loshon Hara in the 1990s. So that's when the tide was turning. That's when Rabbi Kessin did this lecture around the world, right? Encouraging people, year 2000 more, right? So we see a big turning of events now. It's still pretty dire, but it's got a bit better since then. Especially since October the 7th, it's got even better, much more unity in the Jewish people. The idea of the destruction brings to the salvation. Yeah, if you look at how the world is different from the year 1840 BCE to 1840 CE. There's not a major difference in the standards of living and how people lived, right? Yeah, we have superficial differences, but between then and now, you wouldn't recognize the world. Think about people in 1840, with the horses, the carriages. That's been for millennium that's been going on, right? But then you get to the 1900s, the 20th century, you've got planes, air travel, ship. You could go from one place in the world to the other, which was taking months journeys. You can do it in a few hours now, right? You can communicate from people from one side of the world to the other immediately, right? The speed of in less than a second, I can communicate. I can do live conferences with people. I'm communicating with people possibly from on the other side of the world with my lectures here on YouTube. Amazing what science did, and the world's becoming smaller. It's all much more interconnected, right? Now you have AI. This is much more recent, the last 2-3 years. AI's exploded. The whole world is changing around AI now, right? It's the idea of intelligence, but it's a shell. It's beautiful. The Satan saying, I'm going to take the mind itself and make it into something fake. I'm going to make a fake thoughts. I'm going to not just make people forget what reality is. I'm going to make them forget what it means to be human. AI, well, okay, it's intelligent like us. So maybe there isn't even a soul. People don't even recognize who they are. That's how far things have gone, right? The Satan's taking everything which it can, what it means to be human itself, right? And giving a fake version. But of course, everything comes back to God in the end. So ultimately, it's all going to reveal God in one way or the other. Eventually, whether it's Christianity and Islam already familiarizing the world, but the idea of a one God twisted, right? The idea of Trinity or false message in Islam, right? Rejection of story, but the idea of there is a one God and there's a purpose. There's a Messiah, a Mahdi, right? As the Muslims have, there's a purpose to the world. There's a world to come, right? All Jewish ideas, right? And the values, right? The morals and ethics of Judaism infiltrate into those religions as well, to a greater or lesser extent. But that's the idea of the Loshon Hara, the Satan, the destructive power of Loshon Hara, all because of Loshon Hara, right? So yeah. We mentioned the snake and the Esav. The evil aspect of Esav is actually Amalek, which is the mortal enemies of the Jews. And who was that? That was Haman. What did Haman do? How did Haman try to destroy the Jewish people? He spoke Loshon Hara about the Jewish people. Right? The Gemara speaks about how Haman convinced Achashverosh to destroy the Jewish people. They keep themselves to themselves. They're not interested in society. They're lazy because they take all the festivals and they once a week they have the Sabbath. Right? He spoke Loshon Hara. That's the power of the Satan. Right? The power of the Satan, the snake. The power of the forked tongue, speaking Loshon Hara. Right? He spoke Loshon Hara about God. Right? The Haman, Amalek, you see the propaganda in the world, getting the whole world to turn against the Jews now through slander, through Motzi Shemra, in fact, it's lies even. Power of speech. Right? Anyway, so that's the existential level of why Loshon Hara is so powerful and destructive. Let's go into the fourth final level now. This is the Kabbalistic level. The Kabbalistic level is when we speak Loshon Hara, remember the way that it works. Whatever we do here has an effect up there. There is a sphere called Malchus. Out of the 10 Sephiros, you've got Malchus. We spoke about this on Rosh Hashanah. We even alluded to this aspect of this lecture, which I'm going to speak right now. We actually gave a spoiler, right? So you might already work this bit out, what I'm about to say now. Malchus, out of the 10 Sephiras, the 10 emanations of the way God reveals himself, the final one is called Malchus. Malchus is the one which actually does the revealing itself, right? So we have no access to God's attributes in themselves, because God and his attributes are one, as we spoke in the other lecture we gave today on Yom Kippur, right? God and his mind are one, right? We've got no access, with no understanding about the truth of God's wisdom or God's existence, his wisdom, any of his attributes. All we have access to is what he reveals to us. Revelation, the concept of revelation, is this final sephira, this final attribute called Malchus, kingship. That's how God, a king, reveals the potential of the nation. Yeah? So the sephira of Malchus reveals the meaning and the potential of all those other attributes have no meaning for us unless they're revealed. And of course, once that's revealed, that is God's connection with us. That's that divine energy we're talking about coming down to us. That's all revealed through the sphere of Malchus. Now, each one of the parts of the body, or each one of the commandments, corresponds somehow to one of these different 10 divine emanations. What corresponds to Malchus? You can guess. What is Malchus? Malchus is revelation. I have all my thoughts, all my ideals, all my goals, all my plans. How do I reveal them to the outside world? Through the mouth. The mouth is the place of revelation. So on the human body, the mouth is the physical place where you see Malchus, the kingship of the human body. You want to see the kindness, and you want to see the justice, you see it in the right and left arm. Okay, explain that in a different lecture. You want to see kingship, you want to see revelation in the human body, look at the mouth. Now, when we speak, God forbid, if a person speaks Loshon Hara, what is he doing? He's contaminating, he's using the mouth to cut God out of the picture, right? He's saying something negative. He's doing an avera. He's sinning with his mouth. And in such a strong way where he gives power for the Soton to accuse, like we said before. That's one of the other meanings of Loshon Hara, why it's so bad, because you're giving the power for the Soton to accuse. And that causes a lack of divine energy. So you're stopping, by us speaking Loshon Hara, we're stopping God revealing his energy to us. So what are we doing? We're actually damaging, so to speak, the sephira of Malchus. That's what we're doing. Remember, whatever we do there, there's a corresponding measure for measure thing from God's side of it. Yeah, when we repent, we use our free will, we emphasize and we reveal God's 13 attributes of mercy, which is Chesed, the highest of the 10 spheres that we spoke about today. When we speak Loshon Hara, we damage the revelation aspect of God. So God's got all this energy he wants desperately to give us. He wants to bring the Mashiach. He wants to reveal he wants the whole world to know about him. He wants to reveal the knowledge of God to the world. But that tool which he needs to do that, which facilitates the possibility to reveal the knowledge of God to the whole world, is the mouth. And if it's all down to the Jewish people, if the Jewish people speak Loshon Hara, that revelation, that lens is damaged, it's tainted, it can't reveal anymore. So that's why the exile keeps going as long as we're speaking Loshon Hara. God's ready to bring the redemption and bring goodness to the whole of mankind. the whole man of mankind should know God. But it all depends on our free will. And if our free will is damaging that very vessel through which God reveals himself, God, so to speak, can't do it. Instead, he has to do it in a roundabout way. He has to reveal it through the evil itself. So what happens? Loshon Hara caused all the suffering of the Jews, right? And the suffering of the Jews eventually, through a very, very long route, reveals God's oneness. Why? For example, the Jews who are still loyal to God today, right, are doing a much greater sanctification of God's name, right, and revelation of the truth of God than if everything would be hunky-dory and nice and everything roses, right? The fact that we're sticking to our faith and our conviction and our loyalty to God throughout 2,000 years of exile and persecution and attempted attractions for us to leave our faith or forced conversions, and we're still going. That is amazing. That's what Adam had planned, right? Through the evil itself, God will be revealed. The more evil, the greater the revelation in the end. Beautiful. But that's what happens with Loshon Hara. Loshon Hara, you're stopping that revelation, right? And unfortunately, the other path is through suffering, as we spoke about all the tragedies and oppressions which happen to the Jewish people through Loshon Hara. So on one hand, you've got Zerampin in terms of the Partsufim. Zerampin is God's judgment, right? And he says, "Yeah, I'm ready to give the final revelation, the final redemption." But Nukva, which is the final of the 5 Partsufim, the Partsufim are the more persona type ways that God. You've got the 10 Sephiros, which are 10 specific attributes or characteristics. Then you've got 5 persona type beings. You've got the merciful grandfather. You've got the one God acts with us like a father, like a nurturing mother, like a harsh older brother, so to speak. Yeah, who's making sure we're behaving ourselves. That's their ampin. And then you've got God actually relating to us directly. That's Nukva. That's the Shekhinah. How we perceive God. Finally, that's Nukva. So we take Loshon Hara damages Nukva, damages the Shekhinah. Right? The Shekhinah is in Golus because of Loshon Hara. Literally. Because the Shekhinah is that aspect which corresponds to revelation. That's how damaging Loshon Hara is. But that tells us, look at it the other way. The people, when Mashiach actually comes, he's going to say, "Why do you take so long? Thousands of years." Well, you know why? Because there are people who stop speaking Loshon Hara. And they stop giving that divine energy over to the evil side. And eventually it let God reveal himself and send me to usher in the time of universal knowledge of God. Who are these people? The ones who don't speak Loshon Hara. Imagine the reward of the people who, if the destruction, devastation which is caused by Loshon Hara is so great, we know that God's attributes is he rewards 500 times more people who do the good thing than the equivalent bad thing. So if Loshon Hara is so destructive, it corresponds to all the Averas in the Torah, like we've explained over the last 2 lectures. Imagine the reward of someone who's careful about his Loshon Hara, right? Only speaks good about people. Speaks Loshon Hara when it's necessary. When you're trying to stop a people teaching false teachings. Careful, this person's a heretic. Yeah, he's teaching wrong things. Don't listen to him. Be careful, that person's trying to cause trouble. He's trying to damage him. Be careful. Don't let him just ambush you, Gedalia, like we said last time. Yeah, this person's actually plotting to do terrible things. He's putting Jewish people in danger. He's putting that person in danger. Warn the person. But learn the laws of Loshon Hara. Very important. The laws of Loshon Hara are quite precise and they're very clear. Just got to go through them. You can't be careful about not speaking Loshon Hara without doing the laws, right? With all the good intentions in the world, you need to know the laws of Loshon Hara. Okay. Yeah, so everyone should learn the laws of Loshon Hara. In the Sefer Chofetz Chaim, you've got many versions in English now. You've got like do a bit a day. You've got all different versions. Some are much lighter, some are much more technical. Pick the one you like. Right? Chofetz Chaim, the laws of power of speech. Rabbi Kessin, I think he's got a book which he brought out recently. Look for Mendel Kessin. I'm not sure. The True Power of Speech or something. I think it was that's the name of the book. I think something like that. Yeah, but imagine we know that Yom Kippur is coming up, right? The pinnacle of Yom Kippur is when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, goes into the Kodesh Kodashim one time a year, the Holy of Holies. He brings the incense. What's the incense there for? It's only for one reason. It's to bring atonement for Loshon Hara. Why? Because when we speak Loshon Hara, all our mitzvahs, which we do, as we understand now, get tainted. We're just giving more energy to the Satan. Of course, that doesn't mean don't do mitzvahs, don't do the commandments, don't do prayers because it gets leached by the Satan. That happens anyway. But it affects even the good actions we do, right? We still get rewards for them eventually, but in the meantime, even our positive actions kind of feed in a way the Satan because of Loshon Hara. And we've got one opportunity. There's one time a year where we can completely clean the slate and get rid of the Loshon Hara and that impurity. And that's a day with the Satan, like we spoke about last year, about Yom Kippur. There's one day of the year the Satan doesn't have any power. That's on Yom Kippur, right? And he goes into the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies with the incense to get rid of the sin of Loshon Hara. So let's use that opportunity this year, take on ourselves the best we can, right? So have a year where we stop speaking Loshon Hara. We try to see the good in other Jews, speak good about them, learn the laws of Loshon Hara to know when we do speak Loshon Hara, right? Right? But only for a positive reason. Otherwise, we don't disparage another Jew, which gives power to the Satan, which causes destruction and death and suffering in the world, and stops our prayers being heard completely. Right? Yom Kippur, everything's good. Everything can be cleaned. Right? Yom Kippurim, day of cleaning, of wiping away, like we spoke about last year on the Yom Kippur lecture. Yeah. And of course, we know in Rosh Hashanah, the 100 blasts of the shofar, 30 to get rid of to destroy or to humble the inclination for idolatry, 30 for arroyos, for immorality, promiscuity. The next set of 30 are to get rid of the evil inclination for murder and everything which comes out of murder. The last 10, the final 10, which gets up to 100 blasts of the shofar, those last 10 to get rid of the Yetzer Hara, the inclination for Loshon Hara. Loshon Hara, that's everything. Practically and on a deep level. Why God makes it like that? That's how he made it, right? The Loshon Hara, the power of speech is immense. God created the world. He spoke, he created. We create our reality with speech. And we can choose whether we want to create a good reality or we want to cause destruction. It's up to us. So just remember the 4 words of Rabbi Kessin, right? When you want to speak about someone, 4 words. Is it worth it? Wish everyone a very good year, a very good fast. Hopefully we fix the Loshon Hara, and after Yom Kippur, be extra careful to last out as long as you can. Get as much time as you can before the inevitable word of question for Loshon Hara comes in, learn the laws of Loshon Hara, and remember, is it worth it? Have a good year, everyone.